So, so can you please tell me a little bit about yourself, your name, where you live and work?
Okay, I'm Alan Graham, and I live and work in the Chicago area.
And what do you do?
I do a lot of things. I'm a child and adolescent psychologist and an executive coach and leadership development individual. So I work with adults and executives in organizations, in nonprofits, and for large organizations and small organizations. And then I coach people with ADD, and I work with children and adolescents in a psychotherapy/coaching model.
Right. And what's your background for doing that?
I have a PhD in psychology from Northwestern, and I was trained as a coach through Mentor Coach. I did that in 1999, and I continuously go to conventions and places to continue to learn.
And how did you learn positive psychology?
Well, as part of my working in Mentor Coach, I'm also a trainer, and I train ADD coaches. In 2003, Marty Selkman started his Authentic Happiness Coaching program over the phone, and he needed discussion leaders for the program. And so there were 15 of us who were chosen as discussion leaders. And so it was 2 hours a week where Marty lectured to 300 people on the phone once a week, and then once a week we, us discussion leaders, they're called pod leaders, we had about 15 to 20 people on the phone that we led a discussion on the concepts and the interventions that Marty did. And we met with Marty once a week for 26 weeks. So that was my introduction to positive psychology and how I learned about positive psychology. And when I first did it, my initial response was, well, duh. I mean, that's what I do all the time. It's always been what I did.
Yeah.
So I've always had that mindset.
Right. So for how long would you say that you've been working that way?
Since 2003. Well, officially in positive psychology from 2003 is when I first learned about it, but I've been working this way my whole professional life.
Right. And so how does coaching fit into your job? How much of it is coaching, would you say?
Well, my executive coaching, depending on when you talk to me, can be anywhere between 10% and 50% of what I do. The economy has a lot to do with that, and the money that's available in organizations for it. My ADD coaching is probably another 25 to 30 to 40%, and I will do my ADD coaching sometimes within the context of psychotherapy. So we'll bill it as psychotherapy, and we'll do it as psychotherapy. We'll call it psychotherapy, but it's really coaching.
Right. And what issues do people want you to help them with?
Well, lots of issues. In the ADD world, these are people who want to be organized, they want to help to set their priorities, they want to kind of figure out what's ADD and what's not, and how they can bring their gifts to the world. In my work with my executives, they've usually been called in. I've usually been called in because either they're a high potential within the organization, and that they want to help them. The organization wants the high potential to develop their skills in order, their emotional intelligence skills in working with people and being able to lead, etc. You know, occasionally some of these people are called in because they've had a particular difficulty with working with a boss or working with peers and stuff like that, and so they may call me in for that as well.
Right. And how do you do it when you work with people in executive coaching, for instance? What do you do?
What do I do?
Yeah. So if I was an executive and I wanted coaching, what would happen?
Well, you know, there's a process. So there's a process by which the engagement begins, and someone within the organization, it'll either come from the person who wants the coaching themselves, or from someone within the organization who is designated as the person to initiate it. And the first thing we need to do is kind of set up a contract for what I'm going to do, what's going to be the length of the engagement, and what are the logistics of how the engagement is going to play out, what are going to get paid, all that kind of stuff. Once we get that settled, then the coachee and I will meet, and we will talk about what they're looking for coaching for. And when in an organization, one of the things that you have to be careful about and have to be aware of is that the coachee may have a set of goals, but the organization has a set of goals. So there really are three people involved in the three entities, I guess, involved in the situation. And so what I will often do is at the beginning, well, I always do at the beginning of an engagement, is we come up with a set of goals. And that's kind of our goal for the initial part of the engagement, is come up what are we going to work on. And we'll have public goals, which are the ones that we'll share with the organization, usually the individual's boss or whoever in the organization needs to get it. Then we'll have our private goals, which is just between me and the coachee, and the organization doesn't know what that is, because sometimes we want to talk about the boss. And the process that I go through in doing that is that I like to go through is I like to do assessments. And so what I will do is I need to understand who the person is and the environment in which they live. And so I'll do individual assessments, and I'll also do 360s. If the organization has a 360, I'll use theirs, but I'll also do what I call a qualitative 360, where I'll interview the boss, I'll interview some direct reports, I'll interview some peers, to kind of get a feel for how the people view the individual that I'm looking at. And I've adapted that qualitative interviewing on the Reflected Best Self from the Center for Positive Organizational Scholarship. The Reflected Best Self is one where they say, tell me 3 times that you've seen this individual at their best, and tell me a story about that. And so that's actually what when I go into one of these interviews, that's the question I ask. Saying I'm going to ask 2 questions. One is, tell me 3 stories about when you've seen this individual at their best. Then I'll say, tell me 3 things that you would like to see this person do more of. So I maintain it in that positive realm, because it's really strengths-based. I mean, I come from the strengths-based perspective. I always have come from a strengths-based perspective, that we build on our strengths and we learn how to use our strengths, and we move on from there.
Right. So when does this happen? Is that before the first session? Or
once we start. So my initial session is I will sit with the coachee and I'll say, so tell me why you're here. And they'll tell me. And we have a dialogue back and forth to kind of get a sense of what's going on. And then I will explain to them how I'd like to proceed from here. And we make our verbal coaching agreement, because we've already signed our formal one prior to the meeting, as to how we will proceed in terms of confidentiality, in terms of what they expect from me, what I expect from them, etc. And then we proceed pretty much. So the first phase is kind of an assessment phase. I'm getting to know who they are, what's going on for them, what they need, what their goals are. I often have them fill out a form before the first session that lists their 90-day goals, their 1-year goals, and their 5 to 10-year goals. And I always prompt them by saying people usually overestimate their 90-day goals and underestimate their 5 to 10-year goals. And we can use that as a starting point to begin to craft what our mission for the coaching engagement will be. Depending on the individual that I'm working with, will depend on how that plays out and how much we'll take the input from the qualitative 360 that I'll do. And so in that initial session, we'll also come up with people that they would like me to interview. Right. And I rely on them. I mean, sometimes it'll happen where the people who have engaged me into the engagement have some people that I want to interview, that they want me to interview, so I'll do that as well. And that becomes part of the assessment process. Right.
And what happens from then on?
So once we do that, so that may take 6 or 7 sessions. A normal engagement is 24 hours of coaching, which is about 6 months. Sometimes with an executive, it's hard to get in 4 times a month, so or 4 hours a month, so it can go out to 8 or 9 months. So while we're gathering data, we've already have that initial set of goals that we're working on, so we're kind of refining those goals and really working on those goals, and then come up to a point where we actually formalize those goals into a formalized written statement of what the goals are, how we plan, the logistics of how we plan to achieve them, and who are going to be involved in it. And then we'll have an alignment meeting with the individual's boss and get them signed on with it, so that they know what we're working on. Again, these are the public goals, not the private goals. And get their buy-in. And once we do that, then we go back and we go about our business of moving on with the coaching.
And how do you do that? Is it anything typical, or any process that you're following, or what would it look like?
I follow the lead of the client and what their agenda is. There's certain things, as once we have that framework, that's the basis upon we utilize those resources to work with the client's agenda. And so that's what we do. And so, to look at, if you kind of came in and just kind of have to observe a coaching session, we could be hanging out, and I have a very relaxed style. And so I don't really get in people's faces. I have a way of challenging people. One guy once said, who was a mental health professional, he said, I have a remarkable way of cradling a person's narcissism while I confront them. So I will confront them and challenge them on things that they're is part of what we're doing, but do it in such a way that they feel respected and valued in doing that. And then along the way, we may have another alignment meeting, another progress meeting with their boss. Have one guy that I'm working with who has a direct line boss and a dotted line boss. So we do 2 of them. Because you got to. And then there are occasions when the issues that were going on are related to somebody else, maybe one of their direct reports, or maybe a colleague. We may bring them in for one of the sessions and have a 3-way or 4-way, depending on what it may be. There are times that I may go in and observe my coachee in a meeting, kind of sit like a fly on the wall in the back and kind of watch what goes on, so I can gather more information and maybe, have grist for the mill to talk about. And then that proceeds on, and then as we come to the close of the engagement, we have a decision point at that point. Have we achieved the goals that we've worked on? Are there other goals that have emerged during the course of the the course of the engagement? Because I do psychotherapy sometimes I mix up those words. But are there other goals that want to be worked on? And so at that point, we will decide whether we want to extend the engagement or not. And often they do, and sometimes they don't. That often has to do with not only where they are with it, but what the financial arrangements with the organization are. And then we have a closing meeting with the direct individual, the boss.
Right.
And we'll do that to see where we are and kind of update that, and then we close out the engagement. What I like to do is have kind of a final assessment review with the client to see what they got out of the coaching and whether it is beneficial and help them, that kind of stuff.
Right. And you mentioned assessments. So do you use some positive psychology assessments?
I do. I use, as I said, the reflective best self. I love to use the strengths assessments. I like the Realized 2. I think that's very powerful. I use the VIA, depending on where I am, what we're talking about. Right now, I'm more enthusiastic about the Realized 2, so I'm using that more. I'll use the Myers-Briggs. I'll use the California Psychological Inventory sometimes. The EQI, I'll use that. Depending on the engagement, will influence the amount of assessment I do. Again, that's part of the upfront contracting. Can I contract in an assessment piece of that? If I can, I often can do more assessments than I might be able to do otherwise.
And when do you know which intervention or assessment to choose? Like how do you choose between the VIA or the Realized 2 or?
Well, that's a good question. At this point, I'm really enamored with the Realized 2. And I'm enamored with it because it gives us a richer data, because the Realized 2 divides it into realized strengths, unrealized strengths, learned behaviors, and weaknesses, which really facilitates when I debrief that with a client. So much richness comes out of that debrief. Now, I've debriefed the VIA, and I haven't gotten as much richness, but in the program we're in with Carol Kaufman yesterday, she gave me some new ideas on how to debrief the VIA that I'm going to use, in particularly getting from the client, eliciting more from the client what those strengths, their top strengths, mean to them.
Yeah.
I think that's really going to enhance that kind of debrief. I often use the VIA when I'm working with somebody who, even $25 they don't want to spend. So when I'm working with ADD coaches, people who are paying individually, they may not want to spend the money to do the Realized 2 and use the VIA. And I feel comfortable with both of them, and I like them both. So.
Right. And how do you debrief on the Realized 2, for instance? Like what happens after they take the assessment?
Excuse me. So when I do the debrief, I give them the printout, and it's very colorful, and I do a little bit of education of what the Realized 2 model is, with the 4 quadrants. And then the way that works is that you work to marshal. You want to marshal your realized strengths. You want to maximize your unrealized strengths. You want to minimize your weaknesses, and you want to moderate your learned behaviors. And so what the printout does is gives you up to 7 realized strengths, gives you up to 7 unrealized strengths, gives you up to 4 learned behaviors and 3 weaknesses. That's what they are. And I'll start, and I'll ask them, what do you notice first? And see what comes up for them. Now, a number of people say, I don't know, there's a lot of stuff here. And if they're at that spot, then I'll start to direct them, and we'll start based on how much I know them. There may be something that I might see that might be that I'm interested in. If they can't come up with anything, I may start there. If none of that happens, we'll start with the realized strengths, and we'll go through them, and again, help to get a sense for them of what they see that as, and helping them to define what that is. And then we talk about marshaling those strengths. Do any of these strengths ever get you in trouble? One of my strengths is humor, and we'll see whether it shows up in this interview or not. But because humor is one of my strengths, when you overuse humor, you can look like a buffoon, and I have to watch that so I don't fall into buffoonery. And so that's what it's meant by marshaling your strengths. You need to know when to use them, when to not to use them. And so we'll talk about those, and then from there, we'll go over to the unrealized strengths and take a look at what those are. And what's significant about the unrealized strengths is they're ones that you're good at, that you gain energy from, that you get real stoked when you do them, but you don't use them as much. And so a perfect example is a guy that I've worked with whose realized strengths are detail and drive and competition, and so he's really good at kind of getting to the quick and moving forward, but he runs people over. And that was actually the reason why I was brought in to coach him, to help him with that. And then when we moved over to the unrealized strengths, one of his unrealized strengths is relationship deepener. So what we've been able to do is use that relationship deepener part to help him to establish relationships with the people that he's running over, so that then when so they have a relationship. When he's starting to run them over, the other people can say, "Whoa, slow down, buddy," or something like that, and they have a relationship where they can do that. Or that he's now more self-aware, he's more mindful, and he knows to kind of, because that's what he does, and he has to moderate that, marshal those strengths, that sometimes he won't get the buy-in that he needs when he does that, so we back off on that.
Yeah.
And then, so we'll go from the unrealized strengths, and we'll, again, if they have a preference, I'll usually let them make the choice. So where do you want to go next?
Yeah.
And then we'll go through the four, and we'll see how they interact. And when it's most powerful, the insights that we come to during that debrief will resurface throughout the course of the coaching. You know, so we'll go and say, well, how is your strength of relationship deepener helping you here? You know, how is your strengths of drive and detail, what's that doing for you right now? And that it becomes a framework and a lexicon of our coaching, so we kind of know what we're talking about.
Right. What about positive interventions? Do you use positive interventions?
Well, yeah. Depending on who I'm talking to, and I find with my ADD coachees, I use some differently than I will with my executives. With my ADD coachees, one of the things that I often do, because people with ADD tend to get beaten down a lot, because how come you can't do this? You did this yesterday, how come you're not doing it today? And so there's often issues of competency. So one of the things that I love to use is the 3 good things exercise. And early on, I have them start doing that, and I tell them to get themselves a little notebook. You know, usually I suggest they do it at night before they go to bed, and spend 10-15 minutes, kind of, or however long it takes. And you put a line in the middle of the page, and on one side you write 3 good things that happened that day, and then on the other side why they went well. And I explain to them that it may be difficult at first, but it helps to move your focus to focusing on what's working well, as opposed to what is working poorly. And that kind of becomes a framework for how we start to look at it. It starts to refocus the coaching onto positive and moving forward. I've done it with kids, and one of the most powerful times I did it with kids is when I do it with kids, and this was a 12-year-old who actually, he was diagnosed with the ADD and bipolar, and he and his mother were like at a point where they're killing each other. I mean, there was really animosity. It was horrible. I had them do this 3 good things exercise, but when I do it particularly with a pre-adolescent or adolescent ADD, I always have the parent write it down. Cause I have the parent and the kid do it together. Yeah. So I don't always. With some adolescents, they'll do it by themselves. But with the pre-adolescents and the younger adolescents, I have them do it together, because it really, what it does is it helps that parent-child bond to start looking at the positive. And so with this 12-year-old boy, they were at odds so much. This particular exercise, within 2 weeks, they were like happy as clams. It was amazing. I couldn't believe it. We always like our success stories. That's one of the best ones I got. And it's sustained, because they continued to do it. And it became this positive time of the day, every day for them, where they could sit down and kind of talk about all the good things. And then they started to pick out good things that were happening in the experience. And then, Barbara Fredrickson's Broad and Build came to life, because all of a sudden this kid who was getting in trouble at school, having difficulties with other kids and stuff like that, he started to develop more relationships at school. His grades started to improve, and really looking at it, I think it was this exercise that what did it, and because it created this upward positive spiral that started with him and his mother, and it just spread out from there.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Yeah. Do you use other interventions?
Probably positive storytelling, because I'm really focusing on strengths and, how did that work well? Have you used the strength in the past? How can you use that strength to what's happening now? So that's really strengths-based. Actually, if we look in the book and we go down a list of all the interventions, probably don't use them specifically. It's more of a, I like to craft interventions that make sense with the individual that I'm working with. And because I go in with a positive mindset and a mindset that encourages autonomy, competence, and relatedness, thank you, Adisi, that we craft them together. You know, so there's a challenge, and how can we craft a way to look at this challenge that's going to help you deal with it? And so we craft them there.
Right. And do you follow any principles when you craft them, or how do you do it? Like, how do you get the ideas?
It's really pragmatically based. I mean, I really help the individual to kind of really make it specific. You know, what are the mechanisms that are going on that are around this challenge? You know, how does it show itself? How can you see when it's starting to happen? And then what are the points we can then impact where we can maybe try something different and look at it differently.
Right.
So that's kind of how we craft it, and then we come up with them between the two of us.
Yeah. And can you give me an example of an intervention that you created yourself and you consider positive?
Okay. I have to think about that. One of the things about me is that I tend to live in the moment a lot, and I'm not ADD, but I may have a subclinical type. So I do them and then I move on.
Right.
So thinking about one that comes to mind, I'm trying to think of one that comes to mind, and one is not coming.
Right. if you think of one later, let me know. And when you work with people, do you only ask coaching questions, or do you also share your knowledge of the theories, models, interventions?
Yes, and particularly in the executive realm, because most executives are really into accountability, and because they have to be accountable in their organization, so they really want to know what's going on. So they often want to know why this works. You know, what is this about? So I will share the concepts of positive psychology. I'll share the direction that I come from, because they often want to know who I am. And when a concept comes up, we'll talk about it. Now, with my ADD coachees, I may talk about it less, but when I can cite data and throw something in to an adolescent or an adult and tell them, you know, that in 85% of the cases, the research has shown that this has worked, or that I've worked with people and these are the outcomes that have happened when that's occurred, when we're following, and these are the concepts that we're using, then they can develop that language and they start to use it. So I find that to be very beneficial.
Right.
I won't lead with it, but as the situation warrants it, it'll help to elaborate what we're talking about.
And so are there any situations where you would share or would not share, or how do you say it so that you don't lead, or?
Well, one of the things that I like to pride myself that I'm good at is explaining things in such a way that it is at a level of the person that I'm working with. So I'll use their language, I'll use their conceptualization to help them to understand it. So, you know, I won't use necessarily technical words, and if I do, I will throw it in as to say, and now here's a big word, you know, or us psychology dudes, we like to call it this, or us coaching people, we like to call it this. So I'll kind of frame it so they'll understand it, and I'll use humor in doing it too, because my experience is humor loosens things up, and because I'm kind of playful, you know, that also loosens things up, and so that'll help when we talk about those.
Right. And One of the questions I have is about flexibility, changing interventions, changing assessments, and adapting it to the clients. Can you say something about that?
I'm the king of flexibility.
Right.
As I said, what I will do is I'll adapt anything based on who I'm working with. And I create things on the spot based on what we're talking about, based on what works best. And as part of the relationship, to get them, when I see that they, from their body language or what they're talking about, that they're engaged, their eyes widen and they go, yeah, this is good, yeah, I want to try that, that suggests to me that that's the road we want to continue to take.
Right. And so if I should tell other people what they could do in positive psychology coaching, how they can adapt things, what should I tell them?
Well, I think you tell them that if you have an intervention that you think that might fit, that you present to them, and then that you do in any good coaching is that you use your intuition to understand how the coachee is understanding that, and help to craft that together. The whole notion of co-creation. I'm a big supporter of that, is that we do this together. I like to joke, I said, in coaching, really what you're getting is a gift. You get another brain to work with. So I'd like to think that has a little bow on my head, and I'm a gift. And so let's think out loud and think about how this is the best ways to approach it. And that's what we do. I lend them my brain.
So you think out loud when you do coaching?
I will.
So what could be an example of thinking out loud?
Well, let's say, for example, I have a coachee who is really struggling with their boss. That every time that he approaches his boss, he gets a different response. So I'll think out loud with them, the question will be, well, what things have worked, what things don't work, when are the situations, what happens with there, and so really what's coming to my mind is the things that are, and the questions that I have, I'm just coming out with them. So it's the old dancing in the moment thing, is I'll do that a lot, to ask questions and even to speculate. Sometimes when we brainstorm, we'll come up with ideas of, well, maybe you might want to try that, or try that. Who knows? And I'll even say, this might sound very outlandish. And if it is, feel free to tell me I'm full of garbage. And I'll do that so that we can think about what we're talking about and what comes up.
Right. So just to make sure I understand it correctly, so to me it sounds very much like a conversation, not you asking coaching questions, but more like equal partners.
That's what it's about. Equal partners is what it's about. I do ask questions, but not from a position of an expert, even though it's understood that I'm an expert, and I'm not coming in prescribing what has to be done. I'm working together as a team to come up with what their plans are.
Right.
Because it's their life, it's not mine.
Right.
And it's very energizing. It's incredibly energizing when I develop that relationship with someone where it's just kind of going like this, and we're back and forth and we're really working on the path together. It's really the best.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And do they notice that you're energized by it?
Hope so. It's hard not to see me energized. So, because that's who I am. One of my signature strengths is zest and vitality. So, along with humor.
So do you bring that into the conversation, or do they create it, or how?
I bring it.
You bring it.
I can't not bring it.
Right.
That's who I am. My other strengths are curiosity, which leads it very easy for me to ask questions because I keep wanting to know.
Yeah.
Kids are interested; they want to know. And my love of learning. I just love all that stuff. So I go in there with like anticipation and excitement every time I go into a coaching engagement that's how I go, because I'm going to learn new stuff, and I'm going to get to know somebody and really kind of help them move forward, and it just very energizing.
So do you use your strengths, or is it just part of the person you are, or do you do something on purpose, or what happens?
Well, I need to be mindful of them, because again, I can use these strengths and I can overuse them, and my energy can be so strong that I can run somebody over, and that's not going to help in a coaching situation. So actually, in my initial sessions, I'm kind of quiet, because I'm listening and I'm learning, and my behavior will change over the course of the first few sessions as I become more and more understanding who the individual is, that then I can be more of who I am. But my initial goal is to know who they are.
Right.
And in knowing who they are, I don't want to impose myself. That if I start telling jokes and they are kind of sober kind of people, I gotta turn them off. And we're not gonna be able to establish that coaching relationship that you need to work and move forward. Mm-hmm. So, I feel comfortable with self-disclosure, and I will self-disclose to the extent that it forwards the coaching relationship. But I do that in a cautious manner based on how the relationship evolves.
Right. And what do you do to make it into or co-create a good relationship?
I'm just a friendly guy. That's what it is. I'm a friendly guy. I just come in and I'm very friendly. And easygoing. So I say, hello, what's going on? How you doing? Tell me about this place. Or, I'll see something. If I'm at their place, I'll say, look at this stuff is really cool, or something like that. One of the places I work at, is it Wrigley? I get free gum. So this is good stuff. I will take anything in the environment and use that as information and use it as a way to further the coaching relationship.
Yeah. And do you do other things to establish good relationship?
By the questions I ask. Because of my curiosity, I will drill deep into questions, into the different subjects that I ask. Also mindful of the individual I'm working with. If I hit a point where they're a little resistive, I can back off from that and maybe come at it from another angle. Maybe not then, but at another point. If that's going to be an obstacle to where my client wants to go.
Right. All right. You mentioned that I should ask you about the puppets.
Yes.
Please tell me about that.
Okay. So, because I work with children and adolescents, not in my coaching practice, in my therapy practice, one of the things that I use are puppets. And one of the things that I find that happens with puppets is when I get people to use puppets, they can often say things they might not otherwise say. And so when I've done coaching in person, and sometimes I do with my ADD coaching, I do families. And there are some families that they're so intellectualized that they don't get to the meat of what's going on. So what I've done sometimes is I hand them all a puppet and have the puppets talk to each other.
Right.
And I'll hold the puppet, and the puppets will do whatever the work is. And that, after they start giggling, then they really begin to open up and be able to talk. So, it's an intervention that we don't do it all the time, but it's a way to kind of loosen things up, and it's fun.
Yeah. Good idea.
Mm-hmm.
I have some questions about what do you do to make your coaching effective? Like, do you establish good relationships, or what do you do?
Well, I think the establishment of the coaching relationship is the key piece. And, as I said before, that I'm very comfortable with people, and I like to sit with people. And as we remember from Barbara Fredrickson today, making eye contact is really critical. Yeah. And once we do that, we really develop a rapport with each other. And because I like to have some structure to it, we do those initial things at the beginning with having to fill out the goal sheet and those kinds of things. So we have a structure, and we have an agenda, but really the important thing is what happens between the two of us, which, you know, we create that relationship so that we're working together as a team.
And do you do anything special to create that?
Just by being friendly, you know, and one of the things for me is I don't like jargon. I don't like using, every time I hear jargon I bristle. I like to talk in the language of the coachee, and so I'll use whatever words they use in order to connect with them, so we have a mutual understanding of what we're talking about.
Right. And do you do anything special to create credibility, like for you, or positive psychology, or coaching, or?
You know, most of the time people, you know, have a website for my ADD coaching, and I have credentials, so if people ask me about that, I'll tell them what they are. I don't feel the need to tell them up front. If they ask, I'll let them know. I do tell them at the beginning, you know, they ask me how I work. I tell them that I come from a strengths-based perspective, and it's steeped in positive psychology, and so I tell them that, and sometimes they'll ask more about it, sometimes fine, whatever. It just matters how the interaction goes. Right.
And do you do something to make the clients stay engaged in the process of working towards their goals when you're not there?
Yes. I use a coaching focus form, and on the coaching focus form, I encourage them to complete that before each session. And this form really is an outgrowth of the goals sheets that we start out with. And so, you know, on this coaching focus form, I ask them, you know, what have you accomplished since we met last? What kinds of things are holding you back? What things are you looking to exploit? What opportunities you're looking to work towards? And how do you want to use the session? So those are the kinds of questions they ask. So we have a framework going in to help them kind of formulate what their agenda is, so that we are moving forward towards something, that we're just not kind of hanging out.
Right. And when do you see that sheet? Do they send it to you before the session, or do you see it in?
It varies with the individual. Some people will send it to me before. Others will send, if it's face-to-face, they'll hand it to me when we're talking.
Right.
I usually get it, it usually happens that I get it 5 minutes before we meet.
Right.
That's usually when it happens.
Right.
Even when I'm in my own coaching, I send it 5 minutes before we meet.
Right.
Because, you know, it's the preparation for the session, and, you know, things happen. So if I did it 3 days before, it's like, oh, I gotta add this.
Right. Yeah. And so you also use it for yourself, like when you're in coaching?
Yes.
Was that what you said?
Yeah.
So is who has developed this one?
Who developed this?
Yeah.
You know, during my training program in Mentor Coach, Ben Dean's program, he had one.
Right.
I adapted mine from his.
Right. Okay. It's a good idea. Do you do other things to help the clients stay engaged in the process of working towards their goals?
Not that I can think of at this point. I mean, we have that kind of structure that we so we can kind of mark it along the way, and we do revisit those goal sheets, you know, periodically. You know, depending on the individual, we may do it each session, may do it every other session, but that's kind of like our template that we have. So I always have it in front of me.
Right.
When we're coaching, and so if something happens, you know, if we may be going far afield, and they say, you know, how is that related to our goals? And if it's not, do we want to continue to pursue it? Do we want to create a new goal? Or is it just an aside?
And you said goal sheets, like, so do you have more than one?
Well, I have the 90-day goals, the 1-year goal, and the 5 to 10-year goals. Or if I've created a coaching agreement in an organization, we have our public goals and our private goals.
Right, yeah. I remember you said that. And what are your coaching clients, what do they say? What's their response? What's their feedback when you do positive psychology coaching?
They like it. I mean, one of the measures it's not an empirical measure, is how many people want to continue coaching once we've done our initial contract, which, as I said, in corporate coaching is usually 24 sessions, 24 hours. We often re-up, and that says to me that the coaching relationship has value to them and that they want to move forward on it. And I often follow up with them, even people that I've coached 5-6 years ago. I follow up with them periodically, and we have maintained relationships. In that, they're always happy to hear from me. I'm always happy to talk to them because kind of catch up with each other. So there's that positive component. In the corporate coaching, we do a wrap up with the boss who we did that initial coaching agreement with to see where we are in progress towards those goals. And actually, in one of the coach organizations that I work with, they actually have a standardized interview that they talk to the coachee after our coaching engagement is over, asking them various questions about how the coaching went.
Right. And you said something about follow-up.
Well, just the follow-up is that I periodically contact my
yeah, that was it. So how do you do that? What's that? Emails, calls?
Either email or a call. If there's something that I run across that I think they might find interesting, I'll send it to them.
Right.
If I'm completing a book on resilience, and as part of that, we interviewed leaders from various places on the globe, and some of the people are my former coachees, and so I called them and I asked them if they'd be interested. Well, sure, yeah, let's do that. And so that's one of the ways. But so that was for me. But often I'll run across an article, I'll run across things, I'll send it to them.
Right.
Well, sometimes I'll just send an email and say, "What's up?
Yeah.
How are things going?" Or I'll call them and say, "Let's get together."
And when you're helping people, how can you tell that they're progressing?
We measure them against the goals. How do they feel that they're moving forward on those goals?
So you ask them?
Yeah, I ask them. We use assessments at the beginning. I don't normally use assessments later on.
Right. So the main way of finding out if they're progressing, that's verbal?
Yeah.
Right. And what do you think causes the changes? What are the mechanisms that could cause them?
Well, I think Barbara Fredrickson today said it very well. In that positive resonance, I think that the relationship is the thing that makes the difference. The fact that the person believes and feels that I'm there for them, that to help them towards their success, to help them to get what they want. I think they experience that, and I think that is the thing that moves it forward. And that I hold that frame, that this is what we're doing. I think that makes all the difference in the world.
Right. Other things that you're doing that can also help cause the positive changes?
Well, I like to think that I know what I'm doing, that I ask the questions, and that I connect into their agenda, that I can help move them forward to get to the places they want to go.
And other things that might be helping cause them?
No.
And what do you do to stay updated? What do you do to develop professionally?
I read. I'm on a lot of the LinkedIn groups for positive psychology and coaching and that kind of stuff. I go to conferences such as this. I've gone to every positive psychology conference since 2004, 2005. I participate in webinars. I'm part of the Institute for Coaching Professional Association. I was part of Marty's, I said earlier, Marty's Authentic Happiness Coaching. We had this discussion group from 2003. Well, three of the members of the group and myself have continued to meet on a weekly basis since 2003.
Wow.
where we share our knowledge about positive psychology, articles we found, and we discuss them. What I'll be doing, I take really good notes at these conferences, and for the next 3 months, I'll be reporting back to them at our weekly meetings what happened at this conference.
Right.
So, so that's really cool, because one of the people are in Los Angeles, one of them's in New York, one of them's in Atlanta, I'm in Chicago, so we kind of cover the United States, and it's really an invigorating kind of thing. So we really enjoyed that.
So how do you do it? Like how do
With
you...
conference call.
Conference call?
Yeah, we call into a central phone number at 1:15 Central Time on Mondays, and we have a 45-minute call.
And do you have an agenda? What happens?
The agenda is pretty much what we come up with. During the course of the week, we are emailing articles to each other all the time, and so often we have too many, but we will kind of say, okay, let's do this one for next week. One of the ones will come by and we'll say, oh, that looks really interesting. Let's all read that, and then we'll discuss it the following week. And like one of our members went to the Aspen Ideas Conference, and she had all her notes, so we've been reviewing that, so we're learning all sorts of stuff from there, and then we'll do that for this. So
right.
Yeah, it's just so invigorating, because we learn so much from each other.
And when you learn something new, how do you integrate it into the way that you work?
Well, the way I've had to integrate my whole life has been, because I have all these things going on for me, I do lots of different things, that I've had to come up with a way to kind of see how it all fits. And Julius Richmond in 1954, who was a developmental pediatrician, came up with a thing called the Biopsychosocial Model. And that's a notion that, there are ever-expanding concentric circles. So in the middle you have the biological, then you have the psychological, then you have the interpersonal, then you have the social, and then you have the public. And that's how I understand the world, and that's how I understand people in understanding them and what's going on with them. So that's how I look at things. So as I learn all this stuff, I just kind of place it in the little spots where it goes on these different circles, and just it adds to what I know.
Right. And what would you say makes positive psychology coaching different from other types of coaching, or other ways that you go? Is it different? And if it is, what's the difference?
I think coaching is naturally positive, because it really helps people to move forward and connects to their positive side. I think the positive psychology coaching, there are certain techniques, there are certain interventions, there are certain mindsets that the more we understand them, the more it gets infused into the coaching that I do. I would say that there are a lot of people coaching out there that may not have read about positive psychology, know about it, but they're doing it naturally. When I got into positive psychology, I said that it was like I found my home, because this is how I've always worked. Now I have the empirical data to support what I do, and it's not something I'm going to advertise to everybody when I'm talking to them. But if it comes up, I will. There's some people that I coach who are very data driven. I'll bring up references that I know and what the theories are and what the data has shown, and that kind of reinforces what we do.
Right, yeah. Are there things that we've not been talking about that are important for me to kind of get the full picture, to understand the way that you work?
I'm thinking that we probably have the whole thing. It's really, mine's very relational. It's all about the relationship, and everything is secondary to that, and then we bring in whatever we need in order to do that. I guess the other piece is, I've done a lot of work in emotional intelligence and Daniel Goleman stuff and all that kind of stuff, and that really kind of fits in well with the positive psychology and how that works. So that's useful too.
Right.
But it's all about the relationship.
Right. What would you like for me to ask other people about? Like when I'm interviewing other positive psychology coaches, what would you like to know about them?
Oh, it'd be interesting to know how they interpret the information and use it. You know, I think it's fascinating. You know, when you talk with people that's been, there's one person I know that does equine coaching. They go to horse farms,
right,
and do their coaching there. I mean, there are different ways of doing this. I mean, I think we all have to find the style that works for us. And it's just really interesting. Whenever I listen to another coach, I'm always listening for nuggets, things that they do that would fit in with what I do and would fit very well. You know, one of the things that comes to mind is in Carol Kaufman's presentation. She talked about the Zeigarnik effect. You know, the part. You know, the things that we stick to are the things that are unresolved. And she did the Beethoven thing, da da da. And it was like, that's wonderful. I love that. I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
And so I would love to hear other techniques, other little things that people use that when the time's right I can bring in.
Right. And if you should give other people advice, other people who'd like to learn how to do positive psychology coaching, who are kind of new to the field, what advice could you give them?
The advice I would give them is learn what the data, understand the data, integrate it into who you are, and to make sure that it's authentic. That when you're doing it, that it just kind of flows out of you, because if it doesn't flow out of you, you can tell.
Can you say more about the authentic and integrate into?
I think we need to be self-aware. Self-awareness is a key piece, and if we look at anything that we've learned through positive psychology, is that when we're more self-aware, we're more authentic, and then we are being who we are. And I think as we're being who we are, we can then connect to others and help them be who they are.
Right.
So that's what I think the goal needs to be. And so I think practice coaching is important, and practice coaching with and having a mentor or a supervisor to help them see how they're coming across, to know that they're being who they are.
Right. Other things that we've not talked about that are important?
I can't think of any. I think we've covered the waterfront.
Right. Okay.